I'm Ruse from Gradle, and we have today Christopher Harrison and Stefan Faber. Christopher joins us from GitHub. He's been at Microsoft for maybe over a decade, and Stefan Faber works on the developer productivity team at Airbnb. He used to work at Gradle. I've known him forever, and you also might use some of his tools like Makito. And with that. Christopher, thanks for sharing, Copilot, one of the hottest topics in developer productivity. We all know AI, all these AI mandates that are out there and whatnot. Give us a bit of the backstory of what you can or cannot talk about as far as, how it all began, and start there.
Yeah. So, GitHub Copilot, I think, is really just, I don't want to say like just another, but to a certain extent, it kind of is yet another tool to help developers write code. That if we look throughout the history of what we've been doing, of like adding in frameworks and creating new languages and doing like software frameworks where we'd have code generated dynamically or generated at build time by these different tools, GitHub Copilot is another iteration, another evolution of that process. And so effectively, kind of the core backstory is, hey, we've got these really cool LLMs that are able to generate text based on inputs, based on the learnings that it has. Would it be possible to have it generate code? And thus became GitHub Copilot. And so it really started by focusing in on the most, of course, like common use case for a developer, which is, hey, I'm writing code, I'm doing my thing, and I'm looking for some solution. And then from there, it's evolved into other workloads, like being able to ask chat questions and do things interactively, being able to bring this down to the CLI and so forth. But at its core, kind of like where it all started is really just trying to help developers write code and write code more effectively.
Perfect topic for a developer productivity webcast. Let's take a look. You have a slide here that kind of shows us in one image how it works, if you want to walk us through this.
Yeah, absolutely. So this slide here is showing behind the scenes how GitHub Copilot code completion works, which again is sort of like where all of this got its start. And so over there on the right-hand side is our IDE. My developers going in, they're writing code, and then what's going to happen is context is then sent up to GitHub Copilot, and that context is going to be the file that I'm currently working on, tabs that I have open inside my IDE. Copilot will then make calls out to OpenAI, which of course is trained on billions of lines of publicly available code and text. And then it will generate out a suggestion that it will then incorporate into the code. So I'm like doing my thing, and then I'm going to see that gray text, or sometimes called ghost text, that's going to go, hey, based on what I've seen here, this is most likely what you're going to be looking for. You can go ahead and then accept it, change it, go ahead and reject it, and kind of move forward from there. So that's how things work behind the scenes for code completion. And then in turn, if you're going to be doing something like with chat or with CLI, it's going to work in a relatively similar fashion, that some information is going to be sent up to Copilot. It's going to generate a suggestion, send that back down to you.
Right. And talking about jumping into the developer productivity impact, and many folks have heard about it and whatnot and have had some experience with it. In general, let's run through the three or four different use cases that you mentioned to me earlier. I don't know how much more you want to go into code completion, but yeah,
Yeah, I think code completion's been out there for the longest. And so I think this is the one that most developers are probably going to already have a fair amount of familiarity with, that they're, doing their thing, they're typing their code, and then they're getting that those code suggestions just in line. Relatively new, at least to Copilot Business, is chat. And I can use this inside of my IDE where maybe I need to do something kind of more interactive. So I don't remember like how to create a controller. I don't remember how to implement something. And so I want to ask questions and maybe kind of learn and do a little bit interactively. And so I can do that in chat. One of the most common, or I think best scenarios is when we're talking about writing secure code. That, one of the challenges I see with DevSecOps is we put an awful lot of reliance on our developers to be security professionals. And our developers aren't security professionals. They're developers. And so they're going to make mistakes, and they're not always going to understand the finer points about why something is secure if I do it this way and insecure if I do it this way. And so with chat, now I can go in and I can highlight a block of code and I go, hey, is there a problem with this code? And then chat can go ahead and let me know. And then I can start to investigate a little bit further. So let's say chat goes, hey, looks like you've got a SQL injection possibility here. So here's how you could fix that. Then I can go, all right, well, what is a SQL injection? And so now we're doing a little bit of inline skilling and having that really nice interactive back and forth. And so I can do that right inside my my IDE, kind of sticking right with chat. With Copilot Enterprise, which just GA'd a handful of days ago, we're now actually bringing chat right into the repository, right into github.com. So I can go to my repository and I can ask questions right inside of there. And in that scenario, I can actually, start to do things in a little bit more natural language. So let's say I've been tasked with fixing a bug, or I've been tasked with adding in a brand new feature. Well, the first thing I need to figure out is, where is this implemented? And normally I'd have to go in and do like a keyword search. So let's say I'm, doing something with AWS, and now I need to figure out where something is implemented. If I just do a search in my repository for AWS, I'm going to get back like all the results, like every single line of code. And that's not really going to be very helpful. So with chat inside of github.com, I can now just in natural language ask, where is blah, blah, blah implemented, and then get information back on that. So kind of giving our developers that very nice iterative natural language experience via chat. And then there's a couple of other places as well, certainly with knowledge bases, being able to ask questions about our own internal documentation. And then last but not least, on the CLI, that I think every single developer has been in that scenario where they know exactly what they're trying to do. They kind of remember what the CLI command is, but aren't 100% certain. And so being able to just ask right inside the CLI, hey, how do I, undo a commit, for example, inside of Git, being able to just ask that in natural language and then getting that response back right inside the CLI, I think is fantastic.
Hey, Christopher, this is actually a very interesting question. I really like this diagram because it really crisply shows the flow of knowledge effectively, right? But it starts with those GPTs being trained on public data. And some of that public data are repositories, some of them with maybe restrictive open source licenses. So if there is some concern about those licenses or privacy, how do we think about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think honestly, kind of the best way to answer it, especially since I'm in no way, shape, or form a lawyer, is to go check out the GitHub Trust Center. And so I'm trying to pull this off the top of my head. There's a slide that actually has the URL, but I think it's gh.io/trust-center. There's a slide that we have on that. Or if you just, go to your favorite search engine and just do a search for GitHub Copilot Trust Center, it has all the information about the licensing and about indemnity and about everything else that somebody might want. So that's really, I think, the best place to go look for that type of information.
Sounds great.
Back to use cases. Do you want to talk about I guess did we cover most of it with the CLI knowledge systems?
I think so. Yeah.
Let's get to the more fun stuff. I'm sure many of the audience wants to learn how were other large companies using this. And last year we had the Developer Productivity Engineering Summit, and I saw a really interesting talk from Uber. Our buddy Gautam and Serdar. So they shared the slide as public knowledge. It's on DP Summit website, and the videos are very interesting. and they're using it for code completion and whatnot. They got some pretty good results, 29% acceptance rate. They ran a survey and developers felt 75% more productive. That's a huge number. And they got a pretty good NPS score for Copilot as well. And I know, Stepan, you also did a very interesting talk on developer productivity engineering with AI, and you shared your Copilot stats. Let me look at one of the. You want to talk a bit about what you all were seeing at Airbnb?
Yeah, happy to share. And this also comes from the presentation I gave in September at the DPE Summit in San Francisco. There's also like a question about like, hey, how do we measure productivity? So of course we want to measure like productivity and understand how like developers are leveraging those IDE assistant tooling. One of the ways is looking at the like PR authoring. And again, like we're not looking at PR authors, at like how many PRs somebody shipped as a measure of productivity, but like we want to have an idea of whether those AI assistants is helping us move into the right direction when it comes to productivity. Some of the example data here is that like majority of the pull request authors at Airbnb, they are using the ID assistants. One of the things that I wanted to highlight here is that like red arrow that you can see on that like adoption chart. What I meant by that is that what we have observed a couple of months ago is that like there was a small-ish cohort of engineers that like haven't get a hang of like using Copilot. Yeah? And like many times it's like sort of inertia or like, kind of like a difficult to get started with, because it's like for some engineers it might be a little bit counterintuitive that like, hey, I'm kind of reviewing more code that I'm writing code because Copilot is suggesting all the time the code that I'm about to write. So we reach out directly to that cohort of engineers. We like put together a small team, and we went like low tech on this, like literally like direct Slack messages, like those bots, like, hey, why aren't you using Copilot solution? Hey, we're gonna have to take away your license, right? So that really helped a lot. Like direct outreach is also like sometimes magical. Like if there's a human who is like requesting something and also like can walk you through like how to use Copilot effectively. So that helped us a lot to increase the adoption of Copilot. And that's like what we wanted to achieve actually when we think about developer productivity at Airbnb, is to make engineers use more and leverage more those AI productivity tools. We can shift to the next slide as well. We also look at the Copilot engagement. The data I'm showing here is from a Visual Studio Code plugin for Copilot. It's just we have better telemetry like in that plugin, so we can like have a little bit more nuanced data. And the data, as you can see, is similar to what Ruse has showed for data that Uber sees. And we like this also helps us understand like how much the AI assistant in the IDE is leveraged. Like, give you one example, looking at accept rate, which is the percentage time when developers are actually accepting those suggestions from Copilot. The way we are thinking about it is like we want to see something between like 15 to 30% there. If it's less than 15%, we're going to be worried that like this is not like leveraged enough, like we need to figure something out. If it's more, we would be suspicious. So generally this data and telemetry is like very useful for us to understand how exactly it's being leveraged and used. Yeah, I guess one more thing I want to mention that is really interesting is this accept rate, and Christopher can tell way more about it. But Copilot is smart in the sense that like if you accept something and make some modification to that code that you accepted, Copilot will has some logic to decide whether this is like accepting a certain suggestion or not, right? Like if you need to change everything in that suggestion, it's not going to count as something that is accepted because the developer actually had to like change a lot in that suggestion. It's just flagging that there's some like really useful logic there.
Yeah, just
Yeah,
real quick. So technically behind the scenes, what happens is when you're using code completion is if a suggestion is made and then accepted. So I hit tab to accept that suggestion. What the IDE will then do is basically just like mark that code. All of this happens on the client. And I want to make sure that I'm clear about that. All of this happens on the client. And so the IDE will mark that code and then it will go back to it a couple of times. If I remember right, it will go back to it like 30 seconds later and then like 5 minutes later. And it will then look to see, hey, does that code still exist or was that code modified? And then that information is going to get reported back. So it's not, again, like when you're using Copilot for Business, you're using Copilot Enterprise, it's not storing the code suggestions for like improving the model or doing anything like that. And so that behavior is all there on the client. So it's just going to report back, yes, this was accepted or this was modified or this wound up being deleted in the end.
Hey, we have some good questions. Maybe we can answer a couple of them. So one of the attendees mentioned a study that suggests that generated code has lower quality than manually written code. Maybe I'll answer it from like my experience, and Christopher, you can take that too as well. One thing I want to mention is that when I see this AI assistant really shining, it's like more for like boilerplate code or like repetitive code, or when I'm not super familiar with the language because I'm contributing to a repo by another team. This is where I really I feel so much more productive, right? In other cases, when like I'm doing something really sophisticated, like deep in the business logic, like the suggestion may not be like the ideal layer. So I think there's a bit of a mix. And my general answer to this is that like you have to like try to use it and like see what the limits are, and like try with your code base, with another code base you're working with, see how well it works. Majority of developers, they do enjoy and like they feel way more productive, and my next slide will show that as well. But that's my answer. But I'm curious what Christopher had about it.
Yeah, this is a great question. And so I think one of the things that is commonly overlooked when it comes to any of the AI coding assistants, and obviously in this case particularly GitHub Copilot, is the fact that we still want to do the exact same things that we do today when we're writing code. So prior to GitHub Copilot, the way that I wrote code was based off of my own personal knowledge, based off of copying and pasting from documentation, copying and pasting from different coding forums. And in all of those scenarios, what I'm then going to do after I write that code is I'm going to go back to that code and I'm going to review that code. And then I'm going to go to another developer. I'm going to have them review that code. We're going to keep that flow going. And that exact same thing needs to apply with GitHub Copilot as well. So I want to make sure, regardless of where that code is coming from, that I'm doing my own personal code reviews, that where I'm going to peers and having them review it, that I'm going through the security scans, that I'm going through my linter, that I'm going through all of those different things. So when it comes to, repetitive code, I want to make sure that as I'm doing my thing, and Copilot is admittedly making it very easy for me to deal with that boilerplate code where you're going to have some level of repetition, that after I do something 3, 4, 5 times, that I pause at that moment and I go, hey, wait a minute, let me go back and let me refactor this. Let me go ahead and try and clean this up. And I would also say that, Copilot can help with this, that with chat, I can actually like highlight the block of code and go, hey, improve this code, or hey, make this code more dry, DRY, don't repeat yourself. So, and then Copilot can then give me back those suggestions. And the other thing that I would say is that, at least for me personally, the way that I will typically write code is when I have a problem, I'm just going to write code to try and fix it. And I don't care how that code looks. I don't care how that code performs. Let me just fix the problem. Let me just implement the feature. Let me just do the thing. And then once I've done that, now let me take a step back and let me look at what I've done. And now let me go in and start to clean that up. And so I do that exact same thing with Copilot. It's like, let me just get the code. Let me just get something onto paper. And then once I've got that, now let me go back, review that, clean that up, and so forth. So I think all up, the biggest thing that we always need to remember is we still want to go through that exact same process, regardless of where we're getting the code from.
That's good.
And Stefan, I loved when I saw this next slide that we're going to show at the Develop Productivity Summit. I thought that resonated really well. Hey, and let's look at how many PRs were merged, right? And how many PRs folks. At the end of the day, that's what folks care about. Sure, you could gamify some of these stats and whatnot. There's plenty of conversation out there on, just measuring PRs merged for productivity. It could be gamified, but I think this would resonate well with most of our audience and developer productivity leaders. Let's take a look at this slide and let us know how this came about and how was this perceived, well, from your engineering leadership.
Yeah, that's great. So this slide shows like the data from the survey we ran a few months ago. So it's looking at like the sentiments of engineers. Like we look at other data as well, like more objective data, but like understanding developer sentiment is also very important to like understand holistic productivity. What we observed is that like 96% engineers said that like AI tools do help them with productivity. And the way we structured the question, we let them answer from 0 to 50% how much more productive they feel. And we have some enthusiasts that would say, hey, I feel like 10 times more productive, right? So like, of course, we have like a crowd like that. But we wanted to constrain the answer to something more reasonable. Also, what you can see at the P50 here is like on average, like engineers feel 20% more productive. One caveat I want to say is that this is across like all the AI tools that like we provided to engineers at Airbnb, including the AI assistants right there in the IDE, but also with AI chatbot integration and like a few other things that we have integrated. So it's like more holistically looking at how like Gen AIs can help with like developer productivity. And this is great. Like we started from 0 to like this in like maybe 6 months last year, because like the AI tools and like GPT, like this is fairly new space. We still are trying to figure it out, right? Like Copilot has so many new features every time, and Christopher can say more about it. So again, a relatively new space, and we can see like big impact on developer productivity right away.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. And so, Christopher, what are your folks saying about all this? Let's take a look. We have a couple of slides from you to kind of set the framework for this conversation.
Yeah. So, trying to measure the impact that GitHub Copilot has on development is certainly something that we're very focused on. That we actually have a researcher, Yagao, whose whole job is focused in on trying to suss all of that out, to try and determine all of that. And so before I get into the next slide, where we start to see some of the specific data, the first thing I think we want to just spend a minute on is talking about exactly how we should measure developer productivity. Because like in the past, all that we would be looking at is, how many PRs did you merge, or how many lines of code did you generate? How many green boxes? What's your streak of commits that you have on GitHub? And don't get me wrong, like all of those are valid measurements, but Ruse, to the point that you made earlier, that's something that's relatively easy to gamify, and it doesn't always reward or measure the right behavior. And so there's a couple of different frameworks that are out there to try and get a more holistic view. The one that we're focused in on is SPACE, which stands for satisfaction and well-being. So basically just how much do developers like their job. Performance, and that's going to be what's the quality of code that we're looking at. Activity, how much code are we actually generating? Communication, collaboration, how well are we able to bring people together to work on a particular problem? And then last but not least, efficiency and flow, which is, basically how does the developer feel about whether or not that it actually is productive? Like how easy is it for them to do those things? And all of that's a simplification. There's a whole bunch of white papers and so forth that you can go look at for more info on space. But if we take this framework and we apply this, and we actually did a case study with Accenture, where we showed an awful lot of different improvements. There's a lot of numbers that are on this slide. You'll notice on the activity that we saw a 35% acceptance rate. Then on the items that were kept, 88% of the characters were kept. We've got 50 more pull requests and a 15% higher merge rate. And then the satisfaction over on the right side. I'm going to get to the efficiency here in just a second. But what I want to do first is I want to set the stage for this case study. So the way this case study was built out, the way that we did this was over a handful of months with 450 developers at Accenture. And so half of them had access to GitHub Copilot, half of them didn't have access to GitHub Copilot. So that way we could do a proper A/B measurement. Like, are we actually seeing the level of performance? And so the numbers that we're seeing up here, I think, are very in line with the numbers that Stepan had shared earlier. I think the satisfaction is a really important one, because one really nice thing about Copilot is it allows developers to stay more in the zone and kind of focus in on things that are more important. That I don't think any developer got into the industry to write data transfer objects, to put forth scaffolding. Like, we became developers because we want to solve big problems and we want to do this elegantly. And like, we take pride in the code that we craft. And I don't want to have to deal with ceremony code. I don't want to have to deal with boilerplate code. And so letting Copilot do those types of things for me is going to help me just, feel better about being a developer. It's going to make me happier because I'm working on more important, more relevant code. But the next question then becomes, and this kind of goes back to the question that was asked earlier about the quality of code. And there's a lot of different ways that we can measure this, but I think one really big one is, does the code actually build? Does the code work? And that's one big thing that we notice there on that efficiency section is we see a 45% higher build success rate when developers have access to GitHub Copilot. And I think that's rather remarkable and really speaks to the quality of code that GitHub Copilot can suggest to developers.
That's great. And I see a lot of questions coming to Stepan. Any one of them that's interesting that we should take now? And of course, we're going to address all your questions in the Q&A. So keep them coming. We're going to do a Q&A, dedicated Q&A session at the end. Anything you want to take at this time?
I think one question that is interesting is there some like surprising use case that we've learned, like something that like Copilot solved that we haven't really anticipated, like something very interesting learning. Maybe I'll share one from my experience, and then Christopher, you can share from the wealth of your customers there. One thing that I found myself when I work is that like 2 years ago, when I needed to do something that I don't know how to get started, I used to Google and Stack Overflow and kind of move things around. And now I'm just typing a comment in the IDE, and I'm just stepping aside a little bit, and then I see some answers. And usually it's a function. I need to write the function. It's kind of interesting how it kind of changes how you work, how engineers work. Maybe I'll throw that answer as one of the things that surprised me or made me really interesting.
Yeah, I think one of the things I see, and I've heard from customers as well, is GitHub Copilot isn't built, of course, to write text. Its primary focus is on code, but it is sometimes rather remarkable that Copilot can look at what it is that you're doing and start suggesting the text as well. So if I'm generating messages or if I'm working with textual data, that GitHub Copilot actually does a pretty good job there. And this is, granted, this is not necessarily business oriented, but I still think it kind of demonstrates the point really well. And it was something that surprised me is I'm an avid flight simmer. And so I wanted to create a little web page to allow me to do my my checklist. And so of course I needed, a YAML file that showed like, all the different things that you need to do, like, start up a plane and so forth and so on. And what really surprised me is I wrote out the first couple of items inside of YAML, and all of a sudden Copilot went, oh, okay, I got you. And then it just started suggesting like the next step, the next step, the next step inside of the checklist. And it was really, it caught me off guard. And I hear that an awful lot from customers as well, is they'll be doing different things and it will do a really good job of picking up that context and giving them back not just code, but sometimes things that are not code as well. Again, even though that isn't necessarily Copilot's primary focus, it's still able to do that based on its training data.
Great question.
A couple of more cool questions, but I think, I don't know, maybe wait a little bit to the end and keep going a little bit.
Well, we got the
Up
next.
to you. If you want to throw in the question, I'm good at answering.
Cool. So, hey, this one is really interesting. So, is there a study that breaks down the productivity gains like by level? So, like more junior engineers and like senior and so on. And I think there's like a second question to this, right? Like, if like more junior engineers or less experienced engineers, like straight off college and so on, they tend to like overuse the like AI goodies. How are they going to learn to become those seniors, right? So I think like a lot of things to unpack here and chat about. Like, Christopher, you want to take that?
Yeah, this is a great question. So to answer the first one about, do we have data, stats, information on bringing it down by level of developer? And at the very least, there might be data that's available. I don't have access to that, or at least I haven't seen it. So unfortunately, I don't have a great answer to that. But to the next question of, is there a risk of junior level developers, maybe like depending on this type of technology too much, or maybe, just accepting it without doing a proper review of that? And this is a great question. And I certainly see the concern. And I think the first analogy that I would give here is to treat an AI assistant an awful lot like a calculator. That I want to make sure that my developers know how to do the math by hand, to stick with the analogy, before they start relying heavily on the calculator. And I don't mean that by saying I'm going to take away, or I'm not going to give somebody GitHub Copilot because they don't have at least 6 months writing React, or whatever level it is that you want to give them. But I want to make sure that when I'm bringing on a junior level developer, I'm mentoring the junior level developer, and I'm helping them out, that I'm really walking them through doing everything manually. And that when we do have Copilot turned on and it makes the suggestion, making sure that they also understand how to best use the tool. That when I'm working with a calculator, if I punch in, the handful of numbers, let's say, I make a mistake, I have a typo, and I get back a response, and I go, hey, wait a minute, this response just doesn't quite seem right. I'm going to know that because I've done it by hand in the past. And so I have an understanding of what it is that I should be expecting back. And I think that exact same thing holds true here, is I want to make sure that my developers understand how to do things sans any form of an AI assistant. And then that way, when they are using that AI assistant and they're getting that code back, that they're able to look at that and go, yes, this looks like what I was expecting, or hey, wait a minute, this isn't quite right, or this is close, or I need to, fix this or update this or whatever it is that it happens to be. So to kind of summarize all of that, because I think I threw a lot out there, I don't think that we should gatekeep. I don't think that we should say, hey, you need at least this much experience doing X before I'm going to give you access to the tool. But I want to make sure that I'm properly training you with the tool, so that way, as it's making those suggestions, that you're able to look at those and understand what it is that it's giving back to you. It's a great question.
Yeah.
Like, another thing that comes to my mind is that, like, if there is no culture of code review and quality like in the organization, I don't think it's gonna change much. Like, so an engineer could like blindly copy from Stack Overflow, just, hey, this works for like a basic use case, like ship this, like move on. Like this can happen anyway. So I don't think that like AI tool will like make it like worse. Like I think you definitely need like a culture in the organization, like reviewing code and like using those like tools as what they are, as tools, right? Hey, there's one more question that, yeah.
I was just going to say that's such a great point, and again, like I think it's something that we quite often forget is, how are we writing code today? And so frequently, copying and pasting from Stack Overflow, and don't get me wrong, like in no way, shape, or form am I bashing it. I copy and paste from Stack Overflow. Every developer does it. But to your point, Stepan, if I'm just blindly trusting that, it's the exact same as me blindly just trusting any code that I'm getting from anywhere. And so I always want to make sure that I'm looking at the code, that I'm going through that proper review of that, both with me as I'm doing it, but also then in turn with the rest of my team. It's such a great point.
And I think there's one more question that was related. It's like we talked a little bit about the boilerplate code there. It's like, if the boilerplate is one area where like this AI assistant is helpful. And does it increase the amount of boilerplate code, right? Rather than in those AI tools like suggesting, like refactorings that like reduce the boilerplate code. Like, I don't think those tools are ready to be doing like deep refactoring, like deep restructuring of the code. But I don't think they will make anything worse, because again, like if somebody does not use those AI tools, they will like type in boilerplate code. They will spend more time on it. It's going to be more error prone. They're going to make a little mistake. They will identify this mistake when they're running unit tests, and they have to go back. So it's going to be like slow. The iteration cycle will be slower. So I think the net value is positive there. But I agree that like it's not like Copilot will not do like a deep refactoring like across like multiple classes with like restructuring your business logic. Like it's maybe at some point, but like yeah.
Yeah, and I can actually get Copilot to help me out with that. That we were talking earlier about with chat being able to like highlight a block of code and going, hey, refactor this, make this code prettier, make this code better, make this code more dry DRY. Don't repeat yourself. I always like to make sure that I'm defining my 3-letter abbreviations, just in case anybody's not familiar. But just making sure that my code looks really good. And so chat can certainly help with that. Right now, Copilot isn't going to do that for you automatically. But again, if I'm copying and pasting from Stack Overflow from somewhere else, I'm going to have that exact same situation. It's also not going to do, like Stack Overflow isn't going to do that automatically for me. That the developer is still in charge there. And I want to make sure that I'm going in and I'm looking at my code and I'm making the appropriate updates.
Great.
Hey, we got a lot of questions coming in. We got a lot coming in. We got 2 more topics, but we could skip some of our topics and jump into the Q&A. But really quickly, just from me working in the developer productivity space, you do a proof of concept, you measure, and then you decide, hey, should we roll this thing out? So in my world of rolling out developer tools at large scale is hard. Maybe that's not a thing here, right? But I want to spend a couple of minutes on that. For Copilot, is that, and for the use cases you mentioned, is that a thing? Is it not? Are there any best practices you want to share? Because there's many folks I've heard in our community that are using it, but how do you roll it out?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question. And especially because with GitHub Copilot, so often it just feels like magic, that so often I can just like type out a couple of comments and voila, there's an entire function. It's exactly what I want. Or there's an entire unit test and it's doing exactly what I want. And so it can sometimes make us forget the fact that this is a tool. And it's a tool just like any other tool. So if I was going to roll out a new security tool, if I was going to roll out a new IDE, I'm not just simply going to throw that out into the workflow. I'm not going to simply throw that out onto all my developers' desktops and say, good luck, that I'm going to, spend some time and make sure that they've got training and make sure they've got all the info to be successful. And the exact same thing holds true here. So I need to treat this just as if we were deploying out any other tool. And as it turns out, based on the research that we have, there's really 3 big things that you can do that are going to help drive adoption of the tool and help you get the most out of it. Number 1 is to identify the influencers. And so So these are the staff or principal level developers that the rest of your team looks up to, making sure that they're bought in, they understand the tool, they understand how to use the tool, and let them champion it. And in turn, frontline managers as well. So like making sure that you have that appropriate buy-in, making sure that your influencers are there. Number two is making sure that you have some level of training. And this shouldn't just be a one-off. That so frequently I'll talk to a customer where they'll go, yeah, so we created this little video and we just told everybody to watch it. And then they're kind of surprised that nobody watched it. People are going to learn different ways. And a lot of times you need to deliver that same message multiple times and in multiple forms. So yes, have videos that people can go watch. Yes, have internal like wikis and posts and so forth that people can go review. Host different lunch and learns. Like do a lot of different things at a lot of different times throughout the course of your deployment to make sure that all of your developers know how to use the tool. Because if I go in, I have a bad experience right up front because maybe I'm not really good at prompt crafting, then I'm going to go, oh, well, this tool isn't any good. And they're going to turn away from it, where what really happened is I just didn't know how to best to use the tool. And so making sure that we've got all of that training available is really important. And then the last one, and this surprised me, but it is true. And Stepan mentioned it earlier about like just messaging people directly, is send out reminders. Send out reminder emails. Like, yes, I know this can sort of sound like we've been trying to reach you about your car's extended warranty, but reminder emails do in fact actually work. That so frequently what will happen is you'll assign a GitHub Copilot license to a group of developers. They'll get that initial email going, hey, go ahead and install the plugin. And they'll go, yeah, I'll do it later. And then if they're anything like me, and I know I am, they'll forget about that email. And they won't ever go back to it. So those little reminder emails actually really do help drive adoption. So reminder emails, making sure that you've got good champions, and making sure that you've got, like a really comprehensive training program in place.
That's awesome. And Stepan, we've got lots of questions. I'm going to ask both of you one more thing, and then we're going to dive into the questions. In 30 seconds, each of you, 30 seconds or less, where do you think AI and developer productivity is headed? We talked about the use cases today, and you don't necessarily have to represent your employer in this answer. It could be your own opinion, or either way, right? But where's the puck headed?
All right, let me start. 30 seconds counting. So I think AI for developer productivity will be a cross-cutting concern, like observability, and it's just something that you have to think about, like when developing any like improvement in your developer workflow, like how, and thinking through that mindset, like how can AI help with like CI debuggability, like faster builds, improving like support load when you need to search for answers, like not only code generation and like test generation. So that is my take on it.
I think there's a couple of different directions it's going to go. I think probably the biggest is going to be increased customization. And we're going to see this, with GitHub Copilot with fine-tuned models. But really, organizations have so much code, and they want to make sure that as Copilot is doing their thing, that as Copilot is doing its thing, that it's going to generate suggestions that are particular to their code base. So being able to customize and really help put their thumb onto the suggestions that Copilot is making. I think that's what we're going to continue to see is increased ability to customize.
Awesome. And before we jump into Q&A, I just want to share a couple of slides about next steps and whatnot. You want to talk more about how folks can learn more about Copilot here, Christopher? You have a few links.
Yeah. So first up, just the landing page, the feature page for GitHub Copilot. So if you're wanting to learn more, you can go ahead and check that out. The Trust Center, which I highlighted earlier, and as it turned out, I remembered the URL correctly off the top of my head, so I'm proud of myself for that one. But you can check out both of those. And the last thing that I would mention is if you go to youtube.com/GitHub, so our page, we actually have a lot of video content as well out there on Copilot, including including a video that I actually shipped out about a week and a half ago that kind of goes through the overview of everything that's there with GitHub Copilot Enterprise. So you can check all of that out.
Awesome. And for ones of you, we have the Developer Productivity Engineering Summit. That's where I learned about the results of Uber and Airbnb and Stepan's talk and got them from Uber's talk. And you never know, but hopefully Christopher can come out, and I'm saving you a talk slot. Hopefully you can come out to San Francisco for this one. And there's great videos from Stepan's talk and got them from Uber's talk on there as well. And we have a newsletter, and we'll send you all this information. You can sign up for a newsletter to kind of learn more about that and download the handbook. Let's jump into the Q. We have a lot of stuff. I mean, we could just do one of these, Christopher, where we just do Q&A and not talk
Let's do it.
The stuff that's kind of coming in. We got 10 minutes. We want folks to kind of, be able to get to their next meeting. But Stepan, give us some good ones.
Cool. I think maybe there's a couple of questions about customization, right? And then, like Christopher, you started talking about it, but maybe you can share a little bit more, right? What's available today? What's like available soon when it comes to like customizing this sort of output from like Copilot for my organization, from my best practices and so on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So today with Copilot Enterprise, I really have two big things. Number one is an ability to index a repository. So with that implemented, now what I can do is I can go ask questions about my repository. So I can ask like where features are implemented. I can ask what a project does. I can, do those types of like natural language queries and learn both about the project itself, but also like how to do things inside of there. But the other very big one is knowledge bases that, when I'm thinking about like writing code, we have our own internal standards, and then we have best practices that are maybe defined by the framework. And I want to make sure that we're incorporating all of that. And so what I can do with a knowledge base is I can index the repository that I'm working on. I can index our documentation. I can index our best practices. And then I can also index the open source repositories as well if they're on GitHub. So if we're doing Django and we're using Bootstrap, yes, I still like Bootstrap. I'm okay with that. But that's what we're using. I can go ahead and index those repositories as well. And now when I ask questions of chat, I'm going to get answers that will take all of that into account. So both of those are available today. Going forward, we're also going to have an ability to do fine-tuned models. And with that, I'm now going to see that type of customization, but now on code completion. So if we have our own internal libraries, now Copilot will be aware of that for code completion. So as I'm doing my thing, it's now going to make suggestions based on what it's learned about our internal code base, rather than just looking at its current context and then its own training model.
That was great. Also, so we want to customize to increase the quality of those suggestions. But I think there's another angle to improve those suggestion quality. It's basically like the quality of the general knowledge that is selected for training those models that then are feeding Copilot. Because there was a question specific to that. So I'm curious, is there like roadmap ideas? Is Copilot also working on like improving the sort of suggestions, but based on that like generic knowledge? Or this is pretty much done and we're focusing now on customization?
So let me just make sure that I understand the question. So are we talking about where a developer can kind of get their own customized version where they're basically just like inline retraining Copilot and doing that type of thing locally? Or are we talking about something else? Like help me out just a little bit more there.
Sounds good. So the question was that one of the engineers said that they're using Copilot, but they find the suggestions not good. They always have to adjust those suggestions. They don't work for them. That's sort of like one engineer testimony. So one way of solving that would be that like making sure that as those models are trained on generic knowledge, this is like absolutely the best knowledge. So that like that what we are getting out of that model is as much as possible matching what they need.
I see what you're saying. Unfortunately, that like how the model is trained and how that's built and so forth, that's unfortunately going to be above my pay grade. So that I don't have, that I don't have a great answer for. Unfortunately, that's going to be above my pay grade. What I will say though is again, like, we are looking at, and there are kind of ways that you can kind of help guide Copilot and kind of help point things in the right direction. Some of that being done today with like making sure that you have tabs open to help give it the right context as it's doing its thing, going forward into fine-tuned models, and then kind of looking at different ways to help retrain and really kind of help Copilot understand what we're looking for and what we're not looking for in turn. So we are going to see a lot of work there. As far as like how the model is trained all up and pointing it in the right direction, I'm going to be honest, that's above my pay grade.
Yeah. And it's more like GPT and OpenAI question, which was like indicated on one of the.
Yeah.
But like, okay, so there's the question. It feels like an OMG category of a question. Like, what happens when like GPT-5 comes out? Are we how are we thinking about it? Is it going to be like double the sort of like the level of the quality you get from those tools where you can really like automate a lot more than you do today? I don't know. Any thoughts, Christopher?
So I want to make sure at this point, this is me speaking and nobody else speaking. And the answer, at least that I can give, and I know this is going to be unsatisfying, but I don't know. Because, this is such a brand new space here. And we've already seen leaps and bounds. But to be fair, at the same time, when we look at a lot of other places with AI, we'll see these inflection points. We'll see leaps and bounds, and then things sort of stay the same for a little while. And then we see another big leap, and then things sort of stay the same for a little while. And so it's hard to really tell exactly like where we are in this space. And again, I want to make sure, me personally, this is me speaking here. I think where we are is we are like right at the end of an inflection point that we've seen a big jump in its capabilities, and we're going to continue to see iterations here. I don't necessarily know that we're going to see another huge leap from there. But again, my own personal opinion here. I think that's enough caveats on that.
And I can only say simply, we don't know. It's a very new space, really.
Yeah.
One more?
Okay. Hey,
do we got one more?
I think we probably even have time for two more if we make them quick.
Yeah. So there's the question about, like, we kind of covered that a little bit, but like, is there a worry that we're going to see a bit of a decline in sort of like engineering prowess, because like they automate so much? And so a part of learning is making mistakes, right? You write something that doesn't work, then you have to debug, and it's kind of a struggle, right? And you can struggle, and unfortunately, at some point you get to a solution, but you learn so much on the way. You were slow, right? But you learned so much on the way. Now you don't have that struggle. We take away that struggle, right? At least in some cases, right? Like not everywhere, right? What does it mean for sort of this growth and sort of like this engineering skill? Again, deep talk.
Yeah.
Your thought. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is a fantastic question. And the reason that I'm like smiling and nodding is because like this is such a very common question. And I was very much expecting this question. And here's the thing is when we look out on the landscape, like I don't know of a single organization that feels comfortable with the current state of their backlog. That I think for many organizations, if they just simply froze their backlog, that they're not going to add any new items to it, that they're still 2, 3, 4 years from being able to implement everything that's on there. That even with these tools that help us write code, that much faster, I don't think that this is going to, obviate a developer. I don't think this is going to tamp down the need for developers, because we have so much code that needs to be written. And also at the same time that we've always seen we've always seen different things to try and offload or get rid of a certain amount of code that we have to write. That if we look at all the different frameworks that we have access to, that now I can write like 3 lines of JavaScript that in the past, if I was going to do it with vanilla JavaScript, would have taken me 20, 30 lines to go ahead and write. Or I'm looking at something like Django, which, I adore. And now I can do things like literally in like 10 lines of code that would have taken me, an hour and a half to try and implement if I was going to do all of that manually. So like this is a process that we've been on constantly of trying to reduce the amount of code that we're trying to create. And yet we still have this insatiable need for developers, for code to be written. It's a great question.
And I think with 2 minutes left, we should end it with that. As I mentioned, there was a bunch of questions also about, hey, can I see a demo of the CLI? I'm sure all that is available on the GitHub YouTube channel. Would that be a correct assumption?
That is a correct assumption. Yeah. If you just go to, youtube.com/GitHub and just go into the videos tab, there's actually a 15-minute demo that I had recorded going through everything that's involved with GitHub Copilot. Granted, I might be biased, but I think it's a pretty good overview. And I would definitely recommend checking that out.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you for Christopher and Stepan for joining you. You're the experts on this subject and love sharing your expertise and what you've learned and what your customers have learned along the way with our community. Thank you for that. And community, we'll see you all next time. We'll sign up for the newsletter to learn more about our Develop Productivity events. And there's also Develop Productivity Summit, DPE Summit. You can search for dpesummit.com, and there's lots of great videos of similar talks on Develop Productivity Engineering. And we'll see you all next time.